Hello America, how we doing today? We're in a cemetery. Why are we in a cemetery? Because there's a story to be told, and this is where I had to come to go show it. What's y'all's favorite movie? A lot of them out there, ain't there? But I think out of all the movies, I think one of my favorite movies is Lonesome Dove. It's a Western, epic Western miniseries on TV. It was just great. It had everything. It had, you know, Western, it had cowboy, it had cattle drives, it had, you know, epic adventure, all that kind of stuff. All great acting, all the way wrapped around to every, you know, all of it. So I was watching a video about what do you call it, Lonesome Dove and some of the things, and I was found out some stuff about it. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with Lonesome Dove, it was a book written by, I don't know the author's name, but anyway, it was a book, and the story I heard on the name was the author flew into DFW airport back in the 80s, 90s, whenever they wrote the book. And they were in a taxi or a limo or something. They were driving down the road and they passed a bus, an old church bus. And on the side of the church bus it said Lonesome Dove Church. And they go, ah, that's the name of my book. So that's what I've heard. I don't know how true that is or not, but that's what I heard. So they named the book Lonesome Dove, and then later Hollywood gets a hold of it and decides, hey, let's make a movie out of it. So the basic of it is, after Civil War, a couple cowboys come down and come back to Texas and realize, hey, we can run cattle up to the Yankees and sell cattle. That's where the cattle drives came from. Well, a lot of cowboys did that. A lot of ranchers did that. They'd come down, they'd round up all these longhorn cattle and run them up into Kansas, put them on a railroad, send them to the East Coast to sell to there. Well, there's got quite a few of them doing that and everything, and the price of the cattle kind of went down and everything. Well, so they decided, well, we're going to run cattle up to Montana. This is in the movie, or in the book. They're going to run cattle from South Texas all the way up into Montana and start cattle ranches up in Montana. That was the movie in the book. It's based off of a real story, though. A true story of Charles Goodnight and Oliver Loving. Charles Goodnight was played by Tommy Lee Jones and Woodrow Call, and Oliver Loving was played by Robert Duvall. The character was Augustus McCrae. So, in the book, they run up to Montana, and on the way they have all kinds of, adventures and, trials and all this kind of stuff. In real life, they actually ran them up to Colorado, New Mexico and Colorado. And they invented this, or they trailed, pioneered the trail, the Goodnight-Loving trail. Well, what was so special about it was they came down the first year, grabbed up a whole bunch of cattle, and decided, I'm going to run them up into Colorado area somewhere and sell them to the military, the soldiers up there, the cavalry and all that, because they were fighting the Indian Wars back then. And the cattle, I mean the cavalry, they needed to feed the soldiers. So they get up a whole bunch of cattle. This is real life now. They run cattle, they picked them up in Texas and everything, gathered up a whole bunch of longhorns, running stray, gathered them all up, and they run straight northwest up into Colorado. And they get out there in the Texas Panhandle, the Lubbock area, up in that area, and they get raided by the Comanche Indian and the Comanche tribe. They raid them and stampede the herd, and they lose it all. So they turn around, he comes back to Texas, and he gathers up another herd. I'm going to run next year. We're going to run up another load of cattle up to herd of cattle up to Colorado, and that's when Oliver Loving hears about it. Goodnight started this. He was a young man at the time, and Oliver Loving heard about it. And he'd done quite a few trails, before, so he was experienced. So they partnered up and everything, and they're going to run up. And Loving says, this is Gus McCrae, Robert Duvall's character. He goes, let's don't go straight northwest through Comanche territory. Let's go around the south and come up the west side of them. So they figured this trail out. From all the years of traveling around out there as Texas Rangers and stuff like that, they kind of knew the area. So he gets out there and they run around the Comanches and get up into New Mexico. Well, they got up to Fort Sumter, and they realize that the military in Fort Sumter, the Army, they needed cattle to feed to the Navajo tribe that they had on the reservation there. And they were in charge of reservation, and then the Indians weren't doing very good with gardening and not gardening, but being farmers and stuff. So it was a blessing to come along with the cattle, and they could feed the Indian tribes. So anyway, that's where they sold their first couple herds up there. They ran a couple herds back and forth and made some pretty good money, and they started doing this every year. They'd run up and do this. Well, got up to one year, they get up there and for some reason they split forces. You know, you go this way and I'll go that way. And anyway, Oliver Loving was somebody, I don't remember who it was, but he goes up there and he gets caught out in the open by the Comanche tribe, and they end up killing him, or they shoot him. They shoot him and he gets out of there, and just like in the movie, Robert Duvall gets shot and he gets gangrene and ends up dying. Not in Montana, but in New Mexico. Well, before he died, he had Charles Goodnight promising, hey, if I ever get shot, or if I ever die up here, you get me back to Texas and bury me in my family grave cemetery. In the movie, they were up in Montana, and hey, I want you to get me back to Texas and bury me out in this little grove of trees down by San Antonio somewhere, where he fell in love with Angelica Houston's character, okay? So the movie switches it a little bit, but you get the idea. He's up in New Mexico, and he had Goodnight promising, if I ever die, you get me back here so I can be buried with my family. Well, here it is. We're in a cemetery, and surprise, there's Loving right there. There's a Loving over here. There's quite a few Lovings in this area. Well, anyway, here's Oliver Loving right here, and on the right, and on his left is his wife. That's another thing the movie took liberties with. He actually was a family man. In the movie, Augustus McCrae was a womanizer. He was chasing the whores and all this kind of stuff. So that's Hollywood. They changed it up a little bit. But Oliver Loving and his wife and all his kids, and a lot of these are his descendants in here too. So that's how I got to this cemetery. I found out about it. That's in Weatherford, Texas. Well, it's just right down the road here. So I thought on the way out to Arizona, I'd stop by here and do a video about it. Well, you remember in the book, or in the movie, Danny Glover played the part of Joshua Dietz. Okay, well, there's a real life character that was Joshua Dietz was based off of, and that was Boyce Eichard. Boyce Eichard was a freed slave, and he fought in the Civil War on the Confederate side, and that's how he became real good friends with Goodnight. Okay, and he worked for Goodnight. Now in the movie, Danny Glover was out there with Robert Duvall. So many names, I'm trying to keep them straight. Anyway, they're out there and they get wrapped. I don't think Dietz was in that skirmish out there when Loving got killed or got wounded. Okay. Anyway, he was real good friends with what's his name? Goodnight, Charles Goodnight, and he worked for Goodnight pretty much all of his life, and he's buried right here in the same cemetery as Oliver Loving. He's buried right here, and there's a historical plaque talking about him. And I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. Now, Loving's over there. Now, Robert Duvall's over there, and Danny Glover's over here. Where's Tommy Lee Jones at? Where's Goodnight at? He's not in this cemetery. Well, the reason was, Loving was a much older man. He was up in his 40s, upper 40s and 50s. He died when he was 55. And Goodnight was a much younger man. He was like 20s. Okay, he was like, there was about 25-year difference in them too. Let's see here. I wrote down the dates. Oliver Loving, born 1812 to 1887, so he's 55 years old when he died. And Charles Goodnight, 1836 to 1929, so he was 36, be 100, and minus that, it'd be 90 plus 3, 93 years old. So he lived all the way up until 1929. What did he do in all those years? After Loving gets killed, after the Lonesome Dove movie, what did Goodnight do? Well, he went down and grabbed some more cattle and decided on his travels he found Paladero Canyon up just south of Amarillo. I thought, man, that'd be a great place to run cattle. Down in the basin, you run cattle all summer long, and in the winter they can go up into the canyon area and be protected from the cold winter winds. Man, that'd be a perfect place to have. So they run cattle up there and started a ranch and everything. Started in a little dugout, you know, sod dugout type home. They lived in there for years. I guess Dietz went along with, not Dietz, but Eichard, he went with them and everything. Well, anyway, they ran that ranch. They got it all built up and then eventually sold it to somebody. I can't remember his name. And then they moved over northeast of there to a town of Goodnight. Oh, train. Just love these trains. I'll be right back with you. He's still blowing his horn. We've been going about a mile and he's still blowing that dang horn. Man. Alright, so trying to remember where I was at. Oh, they run cattle up to the Paladero Canyon, run cattle in there for years, and they sold it, and they moved out over by Claude, Texas. There's a town of Claude and Clarendon, Texas. About halfway in between there's a little town, not much of a town, it's more just a few houses. Goodnight, Texas. They had a huge ranch and a mansion of a house built there. That house is still there. It's right off of Highway 287. I've driven by it many times. Saw it and didn't think a thing about it. It's Goodnight's ranch home where he eventually died. He's buried up there. So that's the story of these characters are in this movie and everything. So you get the idea. What was I going to say then? What else? Oh, this is the kind of video that I planned on doing from now on. Not every video, but these type of videos are what I'm going to aim for quite often. Now I'll still do the driving videos, and I'll still do the cooking videos, people of interest videos, you know, interviews, that kind of stuff like that. But I'm going to look for things like this, little stories to tell, things you go, I didn't know that. Well, I'll be darned, that's pretty neat. That's what I'm going for. So I won't be traveling near as much as here comes the rest of that train. I won't be traveling near as much with the RV as I did with the semi. Just obviously I'm not putting near as many miles on, but I'll try to do as many traveling videos as I can. What else? Where am I going to get these stories at? Well, just, you know, doing Google searches and stuff like that. But also I got to thinking, okay, I can go into a small town. I can go into a small town and walk into the local cafe, sit down, talk to the waitress, talk to somebody else in the cafe, some guy at the counter. Hey, what's this town known for? Or is there anything neat about this town? Or some people in this town that interesting to talk to? Find some stories that way. Another way is you people. I'm over in, say, southern Nevada. I'm over in Las Vegas or something. And I'm heading north up into Utah. And you know that you live up in Georgetown, or George, Utah, St. George, Utah, or up in Salt Lake City, or even on up into Idaho, and you know that's kind of the direction I'm heading. Give me an email. Shoot me an email and say, hey Stan, I live in Salt Lake City and I've got a really good story, or I work at a neat place and I can give you a tour of the place. I can you get the idea. My hometown is known for this, and I'm in Georgia and it's a peach festival. I'm over here and there's some, you know, the watermelon festival or something. You know, there's something going on. let me know that I'm heading that way, and say, hey, you're heading toward my hometown and you ought to check this out. Or I'd like to meet you and you could do a video of me. I've got a neat story to tell. That kind of thing. So I hope to get stories and leads that way through you guys, through the local cafe, through just doing Google searches on the internet, and find things to talk about. So that's kind of where I'm going with this, since I don't have a semi anymore, since I'm going to be traveling in an RV. And it's not going to be an RV channel. It's not going to be, hey, this is how you clean your septic tank out on your, you know, the black water tank. You know, I might have a breakdown or something like that I need to talk about, but it's not going to be based on the RV. The RV is just a vehicle to get me from point A to point B and a place to sleep at night. That's all I'm really interested in with that. So with that, that's what we're doing. We're out looking for stories. So with that, ciao. Have a good one.